Welcome back, everyone. So today I'm going to make a further inquiry into the Mahmed argument. I haven't come back to this in a few weeks, but now is a good time to resume looking deeper into the argument, try and get a better understanding of how it works. I just remind everyone that the original person who the argument came from was Professor Robert Kerr, who's a philologist with a great deal of expertise in this field, and I am merely a messenger. If Mahmed were intended to be an Arabic word in 7th century sources in an Arabic script, as opposed to a Hebrew word in an Arabic script, then we would expect that when rendered into other languages, despite some variability, a consistent appearance of the U sound, as in Muhammad, should be present. The variation in the final letter between D and T is not so significant as it appears in other cases with other words. The U vowel is what distinguishes it from its Hebrew alternative, Mahmed, found numerous times in the Bible. So, without further ado, part one is a borrowing of Mahmed as a Christian term, plausible. The basic idea is that Mahmed is a semantic loan from the Hebrew with a meaning within the Jewish and Christian tradition. A parallel for this is with the word Quran. So we turn to Gabriel Reynolds and his book Christianity and the Quran, page 32. Even if Quran were not a strict borrowing, the use of this term in the Quran, specifically for divine messages and warnings and not just anything that could be read or recited, strongly suggests that its intended meaning is shaped by the Syriac Karyana, the lectionary or compilation of scripture passages used for public recitation in a liturgical setting. It would then be something like a Lane Bed Tutung semantic loan. And apologies to my German viewers for murdering the German there. The term Salah is closely related to Syriac Slotta prayer. What is particularly intriguing is the Quran's use of the phrase Akama al-Salah to perform prayer, which seems to reflect a Syriac use of the verb QWM. And you see that on page 32. Sidney H. Griffith writes, the Quran frequently uses vocabulary and motifs that echo the Syriac Christian idiom current in the religious culture of late antique Arabia. And you can see where you can find that article there. Arthur Jeffrey writes, and in his famous book, The Foreign Vocabulary of the Quran, of all the foreign elements discernible in the Quran, the Syriac influence is the most pervasive and significant, supplying much of its religious terminology. Jeffrey catalogues hundreds of loanwords, example Furqan, Malakut, Rahman, Salah, Saka, and identifies Syriac as their primary linguistic source. Given this, Mahmed as a Hebrew borrowing would not be unexpected. It is part of a pattern of borrowing in which words are in some cases transcribed directly into Arabic. Now we move on to part two, the evolution of the pronunciation of het in Mahmed in Hebrew. A little bit of an overview from Wikipedia, nothing controversial in this, so we can reliably use this. Hebrew ceased to be a regular spoken language sometime between 200 and 400 AD as it declined in the aftermath of the unsuccessful Bar Kokhba revolt, which was carried out against the Roman Empire by the Jews of Judea. Aramaic and to a lesser extent Greek were already in use as international languages, especially among societal elites and immigrants. Hebrew survived into the medieval period as the language of Jewish liturgy, rabbinic literature, intra-Jewish commerce, and Jewish poetic literature. Now, what is meant by pharyngeal het? Okay, this is going to be important here in terms of the evolution of that Hebrew letter. Okay, you can hear het in words from Arabic, ha, example, Hamid, in Alhamdulillah, Maltese in words like hopes, bread, Somali, haba, go, and Yemeni and Mizrahi Hebrew in their pronunciation of het. They've kind of retained that way of pronouncing it. Okay, so that was one way it was pronounced, and later it was pronounced a different way, which is the voiceless vular or velar frictive. Okay, and in the case of Mahmed, this would lead to a pronunciation of Mahmed, and this is typically the way I've pronounced the word. Okay, so it is the same as the ch sound in back or loch, as in Loch Ness monster. Okay, so that's how the het would be pronounced more typically in modern Israeli Hebrew. All right, so there was an evolution from that first ha sound to the ach sound. Okay, so original articulation. Comparative Semitic and medieval traditions, Tiberian, Babylonian, Yemenite, point to pharyngeal het or another posterior frictive for het. The Tiberian tradition is the principal medieval witness reconstructing these distinctions. Kahn gives careful treatment of how the Tiberian system preserves earlier contrasts. And then what happened over time was a merger or change. In many Hebrew dialects, the het merged with the ch of another phoneme, in some traditions represented by het versus che het distinctions. Okay, there's an ambiguous ness that has entered the pronunciation. So the surface result is the same frictive for what were originally distinct posterior consonants. The timing of this merger varies regionally. In some Northwest Semitic contexts, it may be early. In others, the change is later and correlates with contact and dialect shift. Steiner explores dating via Greek transcriptions. Gafter discusses modern socio-phonetic evidence of where distinctions survive. So we turn now to Jeffrey Kahn's book, The Tiberian Pronunciation Tradition of Biblical Hebrew. And on page 122 to 123, he gives us a very interesting piece of evidence. The Karaites transcribed into Arabic script only texts with an oral reading tradition. Does that sound familiar? We find that with Arabic and the Quran, the idea of having an oral tradition guiding people's pronunciation. Okay, the Karaites transcribed into Arabic script only texts with an oral reading tradition, as was the case with the Hebrew Bible and rabbinic texts in the Middle Ages. The transcriptions reflect, in principle, these oral traditions. It is for this reason that the transcription of the Hebrew Bible represents the Keri, the orally transmitted reading tradition of the text, rather than the Ketev, the written tradition. Now, what we're talking about here, what the transcription that we're talking about is the Karaites took a Hebrew document like the Bible and wrote it with an Arabic script. They didn't translate it into Arabic, they just simply wrote it with an Arabic script. And that's interesting because then we can analyze the pronunciation of certain words. Okay. The Karaite Hebrew grammarians of the 10th and 11th centuries were in general concerned with the reading tradition, Keri, reflected by the Tiberian vocalization signs, and showed little concern with the orthography of the written text, the Ketiv. Okay, so vowelization or vocalization was what they were most concerned with, which actually happens to be what I am also interested in this context. The Karaite Al-Kir Kisani, in his discussions of the basis of authority for the Hebrew Bible, contended that the ultimate authoritative source was the reading tradition of the people of Palestine, by which he meant Tiberius, rather than the written form of the text with orthographic inconsistencies. One of his justifications was that the reading tradition had been transmitted by the whole community, the Ummah, since the time of the prophets, whereas the written orthography had been transmitted on the authority of small circles of scribes, which is therefore more liable to corruption or willful change. The Arabic transcription texts can be understood most easily as a reflection of the priority that the Karaites gave to the reading tradition, particularly how it's pronounced. Okay. Now, on page 193, 194, he talks specifically about that sound het. Okay. Unvoiced, pharyngeal, frictive, het. This letter is transcribed by Arabic ha in the Karite transcriptions, and here are some examples. Okay. Some medieval grammarians state that het and its voiced counterpart ayin were articulated less deep in the throat than aleph and he. Now, against that, then you have the modern Samaritan reading tradition, where het has weakened in most contexts to aleph or zero. So you can see there's evolutions in different directions, okay? And there's numerous examples there. So if we take that first one, instead of it being pronounced as hased, it's pronounced as esed, okay? So the het sound has been dropped there. The weakening of the pharyngeals reflected in the Dead Sea Scrolls and the Samaritan tradition had its roots in the contact of Hebrew with non-Semitic languages, in particular Greek, in the pre-Islamic period. Isn't that interesting? So what we find is a variation in the pronunciation of Hebrew words, okay? And this allows us to understand what is going on when it comes to Mahmed, okay? In this weakening, Mahmed could be potentially pronounced as Mahmad or Mahmed or Mahmad, okay? Because of this variation from region to region. Whereas with Arabic, you have a much more conventional pronunciation of words. So this is in fact what occurs in instances of Mahmed in Greek. This supports the contention that the word is coming from a Hebrew rather than an Arabic source, carrying with it a semantic sense from the Hebrew. And if you want to read more about this, you can follow that link. And this would probably be particularly of interest to the linguists in the community. So now we're going to look at part 3. Let's see how the Karites rendered Song of Songs 5:16. Now, just point out, obviously, I'm using AI here to tidy things up for us, but the manuscripts can be looked at. The rules of vowelization is there within the Karite tradition. So this shouldn't be viewed as not supported just because I've used AI. I know some people think that everything in AI is false, but it's not the case. So the Masoretic Hebrew is rendered Mahamadim, okay, as you can see there in the transliteration. All right. If we look to the Karite Arabic script transcription as preserved in Furkovich manuscript 10th to the 11th century, in Arabic transliteration from Geoffrey Cahn's reconstruction based on the Arabic, which is, you can see down below, we can see the word Mahamadim there. All right. Notice the vowelization. So the het is pronounced with a deep H sound, the ha sound. But was it pronounced like Muhammad? The answer is no. It wasn't pronounced like Muhammad. It was pronounced more like Mahmad. Okay, Mahmad. All right, or even Mahamad. Okay, but not Muhammad. Okay, that's the vowels are not the same. What the Karite manuscripts actually show, in all extant Karite Arabic script transcriptions of Song of Songs 5:16, the word corresponding to Hebrew Mahmadim is written in Arabic letters as the following. That is Maha Mim Dal Ya Mim. So yes, it looks identical to Arabic Muhammadim if you read it as Arabic, but it is not vocalized in any way. No short vowel marks, and the intended Hebrew vowels are known from the context and the Karite pronunciation rules. How the Karites vocalized it from their Tiberian-based pronunciation of Hebrew, or Biblical Hebrew, as transcribed in Arabic, the vowels would have been Mahamadim. That is, first vowel equals A, not U. The second consonant is a pharyngeal het, so ha sound. The final syllable, deem, with a long I before the plural ending. Okay, so that's it. That's how they pronounced it. That's how they vocalized it. How we know it's Mahamadim and not Muhammadim. Karite transcription conventions always use Arabic ha for Hebrew het, but to keep the Hebrew vowels, not the Arabic. In Karite text, Hebrew pata, short a, is never written as Arabic u. Therefore, maha is rendered with maha, not muha. This is confirmed by Geoffrey Kahn in his article in the Journal of Semitic Studies, 47, year 2002, page 85. The Karite transcription writes Mahamadim, representing the Hebrew form Mahamadim. The Arabic orthography corresponds letter for letter, though the vowels are Hebrew and not Arabic. And Nadia Vidro similarly writes, although written identically to Arabic Muhammad with plural suffix, the Karite text clearly reflects the Hebrew pronunciation Mahamadim, desirable things. Okay. The key thing, while an Arabic reader might see Muhammad, the intended Hebrew word is not that, and the meaning is lovely or desirable as it carries over the Hebrew vowelization. So now we move on to part 4, evidence that Mahmed was pronounced in line with the Hebrew. So the first one is from a Georgian source, the conversion of Karite. This manuscript is a copy. It was copied in 973 AD. It records a history from the 4th to the 7th century. So in a sense, we can imagine that 973 is a late date. It was originally written much earlier than that, considering the history cuts off in the 7th century. It's possible that it was written as early as perhaps the late 7th century, maybe 8th century, or even 9th century. But what's key for us is how do they record that word MHMD? They probably would have been influenced by the standard Islamic narratives, that's to be expected, but how do they pronounce the word? And that will tell us a lot about how they are interpreting that word, or even how that word was widely interpreted. Okay. So, the long story short, it's transliterated as Mahmad. Okay, so this is the key passage in modern orthography. In the Georgian language, there were 3 different scripts. Okay, confusingly. This is the modern one. And as I found when I looked into this, the transliteration of it is Mahmed, as you can see there in bold. There's a literal translation given, and in those days there appeared Mahmed, the prophet, witness or testifier of God, and the people of the Arabs were converted by his teaching. And at that time, the armies of the Arabs came to Karite and defeated the armies of the Persians, and they took Karite. Okay, now I'm not a no more, as some people assume. I'm interested in whether the source of the Hadith and Sirah represent whoever it was that started the ball rolling here in the 7th century. There's a huge disconnect, as we know. So these sources point to someone in the 7th century, someone who is proclaimed as a prophet, warrior, warlord, that kind of thing. But unfortunately, what you have is a reference to Mahmed and not Muhammad, the Arabic word. Okay, this is in line with the Hebrew word. All right, that's clear as day from the Georgian source here. Okay, now we saw that in Hebrew, the het is pronounced like ha. Okay, we saw with the Samaritan rendering is they pronounce it as an aleph or like an a sound, or sometimes as silent. Okay, and we'll see both of those instances when we look at the Greek pieces of evidence. Okay, but before we got to go to that, I just want to show that you can actually check the transliteration of that Georgian text, right? As I've done here, I've just taken a screenshot to show you. This is independently of the transliteration that was given when I looked up the that manuscript. Okay, you can see Mahmed is given as transliteration. Okay. Now the Greek witness Mahmed. Okay, so again, this fits with the idea of it being a Hebrew word, and thus there's lots of variation in how it's rendered in different regions. All right. Um, the source for this is the Arabic papyri in the Egyptian library by Adolf Grohmann. We have early 8th century papyri text that have two languages, Arabic and Greek. And it's basically the same message, but one is in Arabic and one is in Greek. So we can see from that how that keyword MHMD is pronounced in the Greek. Okay. Where we have the square brackets, that is where letters are supplied to fill lacuna or missing passage. Okay. And um, we can see what is missing based on other similar text because they follow a similar pattern. That's a thing that's often done when trying to estimate what text is missing. Right, so there are going to be a lot of examples of this. So this is we call invoice number 6. All of these are from 705 to 715 AD. Right, and we can see if we look at line 5, clearly in the Greek is Mahmet. Okay, not Muhammad or anything like that. It's not following Arabic vowelization. It's more than possible to put it into Greek form, but they've chosen not to. It follows the Hebrew vowelization. Okay, here's another one. Okay, and if we look at line 5, you can see this Mahamet with the T has been lost there, but the key bit is the Mahabet. Okay, this bit is irrelevant. Let's move on to this. So we've got here on line 5 another example where Mahamet is given. Okay, the key part. Maha, unfortunately, is a lacuna, so we can disregard that, but that was the predicted missing letters according to the scholars there. Here we have Mahmet. Okay, now here we see that the het has been dropped along the lines of the Samaritan pronunciation. Isn't that interesting? There's no reason why Muhammad, the Arabic, would be written down as Mahmet, but when you know what it was in the Hebrew, it makes sense. Here is another one. Mahamet, it's a lacuna, unfortunately, it's not great evidence, but that's what the scholars predict is missing there. And this one is clear, Mahamet, okay, following the Hebrew rather than the Arabic vowelization. And here is another one. Unfortunately, that doesn't have an example of Mahmed here. What it does have, though, is the fact that you have philanthropos or philanthropon in Greek, which means lover of mankind. So Allah is the lover of mankind in the early 8th century. This is very different from the standard Islamic narrative, of course. But of course, Christians use the word Allah, not just Muslims. So obviously, there's a big influence from Christianity into Islam. Now, again, we have in line 6 here, Mahomet, unfortunately, is a lacuna, so it can't be used as evidence. It's inadmissible. Here it is again. Here we have Mahmed, with just a single A there, Mahmed. So the het has been dropped because it's silent, following the Samaritan type of pronunciation. Again, this is strengthening the Hebrew origin idea that it means the desired one rather than the praised one here. And here we have it again. Another one. This is invoice number 68, Mahmed. Okay, line 6, Mahmed is the apostle of God. Here's another one, invoice number 29, Mahmet. Okay, the pronunciation there for het is more like an aleph. All right, it doesn't follow with the Arabic, but it does from the Hebrew. The conclusion is the argument that Mahmed is used as a Hebrew word, even if written in Arabic script, is supported by how it is rendered in nearby languages. Okay, this is not conclusive evidence, obviously, but certainly the evidence doesn't contradict what we've been saying the past year or so. And we saw the evidence that the Karites rendered the word with, even though it was written in an Arabic script, they rendered it with Hebrew vowelization. Okay, so that's what we think happened in the 7th century, just a similar idea. So that's it from me. Talk to you all very soon. Bye bye.